Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something about silence, because silence is loud. When you both stop talking, when the texts slow down, when the calls disappear, that quiet space is not empty. It's full of truth. See, people think silence means the end, but most of the time silence is the test. It's the moment where emotions stop running wild and reality steps in. When there's no noise, no explaining, no arguing, no begging, you finally get to see what's really going on. Silence reveals true intentions more than words ever can, and that's something a lot of people don't understand until they experience it for themselves. See, words are easy. Anybody can say, "I miss you." Anybody can say, "I care." Anybody can promise change when they feel like they're about to lose you. Words come from the mouth, but intentions come from behavior. And when everything goes quiet, when there's no talking, no texting, no explaining, that's when intentions step out into the light. Silence takes away the performance. There's no audience anymore, no emotional pressure to say the right thing, no moment to manipulate with sweet talk. All that's left is what a person chooses to do on their own. When you're constantly communicating, people can hide behind conversations. They can keep you emotionally occupied with just enough words to keep you around. They can apologize without changing, promise without acting, and comfort you without committing. But silence shuts all of that down. Silence says, "Show me." And not everybody can handle that. Some people need noise to cover their lack of effort. Some people need constant talking, because if things slow down, you'll start noticing what's missing. And what's missing is consistency, respect, and intention. In silence, you find out who actually values the connection, because a person with real intentions doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. They don't go quiet to punish you. They don't use distance as a weapon. Instead, they feel the silence and it moves them to action. They reflect, they recognize their role, and they reach out with purpose, not excuses. Silence doesn't scare someone who truly cares. It challenges them to step up. On the other hand, silence exposes those who are only there for convenience. When you stop talking, they don't fight for clarity. They don't check in with sincerity. They don't ask how you're feeling. They just fade. And that fading tells you more than any argument ever could. It tells you that your presence was optional, not essential. And that's a hard truth, but it's a necessary one. Because once you see it, you stop romanticizing potential and start dealing with reality. Silence also reveals intentions within you. It forces you to sit with your emotions instead of constantly expressing them. You start noticing how much effort you were putting in, how often you were the one reaching out, fixing things, holding things together. And in that quiet space, you realize something powerful. If you stop talking and everything collapses, it means you were carrying most of the weight. Silence shows you whether the connection was balanced or built on your emotional labor. A lot of people fear silence because they're afraid of what it will reveal. They're afraid that if they stop talking, the other person won't come back. But let me tell you something important. If silence makes someone walk away, they were already halfway gone. You didn't lose them. You uncovered them. And that's not a loss, that's clarity. Silence doesn't destroy real connections. It strips away false ones. And here's where the power really is. When you embrace silence instead of fighting it, you stop begging for answers and start receiving them naturally. You don't have to ask someone how they feel when their actions are answering the question for you. You don't have to demand effort when intention is shown freely. Silence gives you the truth without argument, without drama, without confusion. It hands it to you clean and clear. So when things go quiet, don't rush to fill the space with words just to feel secure. Let the silence speak. Let it show you who means what they say and who was just saying what sounded good. Because in the end, silence will always tell you what words were trying to hide. Distance tests emotional maturity and self-worth in a way that nothing else can. When communication stops and both of you go quiet, the space between you becomes a mirror. It reflects how emotionally grown each person really is. Some people panic in silence because they don't know how to sit with themselves. They need constant reassurance, constant validation, constant attention to feel okay. So when distance shows up, instead of using that time to reflect, they react. They send messages they don't mean. They start arguments just to feel connected. or they disappear completely to avoid accountability. That reaction tells you they were never emotionally grounded to begin with. For a mature person, distance doesn't mean abandonment, it means pause. It means time to think instead of time to fight. Emotional maturity shows up in how someone handles space. Do they respect it, or do they try to control it? Do they use it to gain clarity, or do they use it as a punishment? Silence reveals this quickly. A person who understands themselves doesn't lose their identity just because a conversation stopped. They don't beg, they don't chase, and they don't collapse. They observe, they reflect, and they protect their dignity. Self-worth is also tested during this time. When you're used to being available, being responsive, being the emotional glue, silence can feel uncomfortable. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you should reach out, if you should explain one more time, if you should fix things just to restore peace. That urge doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. Silence exposes where your self-worth really stands. If your value depends on someone else's response, distance will shake you. If your value comes from within, distance will strengthen you. A person with strong self-worth doesn't rush to break silence just to feel chosen. They understand that being chosen at the cost of self-respect is not a win. They know that if they have to overextend themselves to keep someone around, that connection was already unbalanced. Distance teaches you to separate your identity from the relationship. You start realizing that your peace, your confidence, and your happiness shouldn't disappear just because someone else is quiet. Distance also reveals control issues. Some people can't handle space because they're used to being in charge of the emotional dynamic. They like knowing where you are, what you're thinking, how you feel about them at all times. When silence removes that access, they feel powerless. And instead of dealing with that discomfort, they act out. They accuse, they guilt trip, or they suddenly reappear with confusion and mixed signals. That behavior isn't about love. It's about control. Emotional maturity means allowing space without trying to dominate it. For you, distance becomes a classroom. It teaches you patience. It teaches you restraint. It teaches you how to sit with uncomfortable emotions without acting on them. You learn that not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every moment needs a response. Sometimes the strongest move is to stay still. In that stillness, you rebuild your sense of self. You reconnect with your goals, your routines, your purpose outside of the relationship. You stop waiting on someone else to determine your mood. And here's the real shift. When distance tests your self-worth and you pass that test, you come out different. You're no longer desperate for answers. You're no longer afraid of losing someone who isn't fully choosing you. You start valuing emotional consistency over emotional intensity. You realize that someone who truly respects you won't make you question your worth through silence. They will communicate, not disappear. They will seek understanding, not power. Distance doesn't weaken strong people. It exposes weak foundations. And when you learn to stand tall in that space, you stop settling for half-effort connections. You stop mistaking anxiety for love. You stop shrinking yourself to keep someone comfortable. Silence and distance don't break you. They reveal who you really are and who the other person truly is. Going silent forces reflection, not reaction, and that's where most people struggle. In a world where everything is instant, silence feels uncomfortable because it slows things down. When you don't immediately respond, explain, or react, you remove the emotional chaos that usually drives arguments and misunderstandings. Silence creates space, and in that space, the mind finally has room to think clearly. Instead of speaking from hurt, anger, or fear, you're left alone with your thoughts. And that's when truth starts surfacing, whether you're ready for it or not. When communication stops, the first instinct for many people is to react. They want to send a message to fix things, to defend themselves, or to regain control of the situation. But reaction is emotional, and emotional reactions often make things worse. Reflection, on the other hand, is calm and intentional. Silence forces you into reflection because there's no immediate outlet for your emotions. You can't hide behind words or distractions. You have to face what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. Reflection changes how you see the situation. Instead of focusing on what the other person did, you start examining patterns. You think about how long you've been carrying certain feelings, how often issues repeat themselves, and how much you've been compromising. Silence gives you the distance needed to see the bigger picture instead of getting stuck in the moment. You realize that some problems aren't misunderstandings, they're habits. And habits don't change with emotional reactions, they change with awareness and choice. Silence also forces the other person into reflection. Without your constant presence, your explanations, or your emotional energy, they're left to sit with their own thoughts. They start noticing the absence. They replay conversations. They feel the gap where your attention used to be. And just like you, they're pushed into thinking instead of reacting. This is where intentions become clear. A person who values the connection will reflect on their behavior and recognize what needs to change. A person who doesn't will stay distracted or defensive. One of the most powerful things about silence is that it removes pressure. When you're constantly talking, emotions stay high. People say things they don't mean just to win arguments or protect their ego. Silence lowers the emotional temperature. It creates a pause where rational thinking can return. That pause is where growth begins. Without it, people keep repeating the same cycles, having the same arguments, and making the same mistakes. Reflection also strengthens emotional discipline. You learn how to feel something without immediately acting on it. You learn that emotions don't always require expression in the moment. Sometimes they require understanding first. Silence teaches patience, and patience leads to wiser decisions. You start responding instead of reacting. And that shift alone changes everything about how you handle relationships. In silence, you also learn about your triggers. You notice what makes you anxious, what makes you feel insecure, and what makes you want to reach out even when you know you shouldn't. Reflection helps you separate genuine love from emotional attachment. You begin to see whether you miss the person or just the validation they provided. That awareness is uncomfortable, but it's necessary for growth. Another important part of reflection is accountability. Silence removes distractions and excuses. You can no longer blame everything on the other person. You start asking yourself hard questions. Did I ignore red flags? Did I settle for less than I deserve? Did I communicate my needs clearly, or did I expect them to be read? Reflection isn't about self-blame, it's about self-honesty. And self-honesty leads to better boundaries. Going silent also rebuilds inner strength. When you resist the urge to react, you prove to yourself that you don't need chaos to feel alive. You don't need constant communication to feel secure. You start trusting your own judgment more than your emotions. That confidence doesn't come from winning arguments, it comes from mastering yourself. In the end, silence doesn't make things worse. Uncontrolled reactions do. Silence creates the space needed for reflection, and reflection leads to clarity. When you learn to sit with silence, you gain control over your emotions instead of letting them control you. And that's where real power begins. Power shifts when you stop chasing and start observing, and most people don't realize the moment it happens because it's quiet. It doesn't come with an argument or a dramatic goodbye. It happens internally when you decide to pause instead of pursue. Chasing is driven by fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being enough. Observant, on the other hand, is driven by self-respect. It's the decision to step back and watch behavior instead of trying to influence it. When you stop chasing, you remove the emotional leverage the other person had over you. Chasing teaches people that no matter what they do, you'll be there to fix things, to explain, to compromise again. Observing changes the rules. It says, without words, that effort must be mutual. And that shift is uncomfortable for anyone who is benefiting from your constant availability. Suddenly, they don't have your energy on demand. They don't have your reassurance. They don't have your emotional labor holding things together. Observing gives you clarity. Instead of guessing how someone feels, you watch what they do. Do they reach out with intention or only when it's convenient? Do they take accountability or do they avoid responsibility? Do they respect the silence or do they use it to manipulate the situation? When you stop chasing, behavior becomes the language. And behavior never lies. Words can promise change, but consistent action shows it. This shift in power also changes how you feel about yourself. Chasing often leaves you drained and questioning your worth. You start wondering why you're the one trying so hard, why you're always adjusting, why you're always waiting. Observing restores balance. It reminds you that your value isn't proven by how much you give or how hard you try. Your value exists whether someone recognizes it or not. And once you truly believe that, you stop overextending yourself to be chosen. When you stop chasing, anxiety begins to fade. You're no longer glued to your phone, waiting for a response. You're no longer replaying conversations, wondering what you said wrong. You become more present in your own life. You redirect your energy toward things that fulfill you instead of things that drain you. That's not indifference, that's emotional maturity. It's choosing peace over panic. Observing also reveals who is comfortable leading and who is comfortable being led. Some people only feel secure when they're being pursued. They like the attention, the reassurance, the effort, but they don't know how to reciprocate it. When you stop chasing, they feel exposed. They're forced to either step up or step away. And either choice gives you the answer you need. You no longer have to wonder where you stand. There's also strength in letting people show you who they are without interruption. Chasing interrupts the truth. It fills gaps that were meant to speak. Observing allows patterns to unfold naturally. You see consistency or inconsistency clearly. You see effort or excuses clearly. You see respect or disregard clearly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That awareness protects you from repeating the same cycles. Power shifting doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming selective. It means understanding that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your emotions. Observing helps you set boundaries without arguments. You don't need to explain why you're stepping back. Your behavior communicates it for you. And boundaries enforced through calm action are far more effective than boundaries explained through emotional conversations. When you stop chasing, you also stop negotiating your standards. You stop accepting half effort just to keep someone around. You stop convincing yourself that potential matters more than reality. Observing grounds you in the present instead of fantasies about what could be. It aligns you with what is, not what you hope will be. And the most important part is this. When you reclaim your power, you don't feel the need to prove anything. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're choosing. You're evaluating whether someone fits into your life, your values, and your future. That internal shift changes everything. The moment you stop chasing and start observing, you move from emotional survival to emotional strength. Silence exposes who values the connection and who doesn't in a way that no conversation ever could. When words disappear, effort becomes visible. There's no space left for empty promises, smooth explanations, or emotional distractions. What remains is choice. Choice to reach out with sincerity, choice to reflect and take responsibility, or choice to stay absent and move on. And those choices speak louder than anything ever said. When silence begins, people react differently depending on how much the connection truly matters to them. Someone who values you feels the absence, not in a dramatic way, but in a thoughtful one. They notice the gap in communication, the missing presence, the shift in energy. That awareness pushes them to consider their actions, their tone, and their consistency. They don't just want the noise back, they want the connection back. And that difference matters. A person who doesn't value the connection reacts differently. Silence doesn't disturb them, it relieves them. They don't feel the urge to check in, clarify, or reconnect. Instead, they fill the space with distractions. They stay busy, avoid reflection, and convince themselves that everything is fine. Not because it is, but because confronting the truth would require effort and accountability. Silence makes their lack of investment obvious. This is where many people get confused. They mistake silence for pride or emotional strength, when sometimes it's just indifference. And that's why silence is such a powerful filter. It separates emotional attachment from genuine care. Someone who is emotionally attached might miss the attention. Someone who genuinely cares misses you. The difference shows in action, not emotion. Silence also reveals priorities. People make time for what matters to them. When communication stops, watch where their energy goes. Do they seek resolution, or do they move on without a second thought? Do they come back with clarity, or do they test the waters with vague messages and mixed signals? A person who values the connection doesn't leave things unresolved. They don't gamble with something they care about. For you, silence becomes a moment of truth as well. You start noticing who you're hoping will reach out and who actually does. That gap between expectation and reality can be painful, but it's honest. Silence removes the illusion of mutual effort. It shows you whether you are building together or carrying things alone. And once you see that, you can no longer pretend the imbalance doesn't exist. Another important thing silence exposes is respect. Someone who respects you won't ignore you to gain control or punish you emotionally. They won't disappear to make you anxious. They understand that silence can be hurtful when it's used carelessly. So if someone stays silent without explanation and without intention to resolve things, that tells you how they handle responsibility and care. Respect doesn't vanish when communication slows. Silence also strips away the comfort of convenience. Some people stay connected as long as it's easy. As long as you're available, forgiving, and understanding, they're present. But when silence removes that convenience, their commitment is tested. Do they put in effort when it's uncomfortable, or do they walk away? True value shows up when things require effort, not when everything is smooth. What makes silence difficult is that it forces you to accept reality instead of potential. It shows you what someone is willing to do, not what they could do. And that's where growth happens. You stop falling in love with possibilities and start making decisions based on patterns. Silence becomes a teacher, not a punishment. And here's the part that empowers you. Once silence exposes who values the connection, you gain freedom. Freedom from guessing. Freedom from overthinking. Freedom from trying to earn effort that should be given freely. You stop investing energy where it's not reciprocated. You stop chasing people who don't choose you consistently. Silence doesn't make you lose people who matter. It reveals who never truly did. And once you understand that, you stop fearing quiet moments. You start respecting them. Because in silence, the truth always shows up. What happens next depends on growth, not desperation, and this is where everything truly changes. When silence settles in and emotions calm down, you reach a crossroads. One path is desperation, the urge to fix, force, or revive something just to avoid the pain of loss. The other path is growth, the decision to let things unfold naturally while staying grounded in yourself, respect. Which path you choose determines not only what happens next in the connection, but what happens next in you. Desperation is loud on the inside, even when it's quiet on the outside. It shows up as overthinking, checking your phone constantly, replaying scenarios, and imagining worst-case outcomes. It convinces you that doing nothing means losing everything. So it pushes you to break silence too soon, to say things you don't fully mean, or to accept explanations that don't sit right with your spirit. Desperation doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear that this was your only chance. And fear always leads to decisions that cost you your dignity. Growth, on the other hand, feels uncomfortable but steady. It allows silence to exist without trying to control it. Growth understands that you can't force clarity, commitment, or effort out of someone who isn't ready to give it. Instead of reacting to the quiet, growth uses it. It turns silence into space for healing, learning, and strengthening boundaries. Growth says, if it's meant to continue, it will do so with honesty and effort. If it ends with clarity and self-respect. When you choose growth, you stop measuring your worth by how quickly someone responds or whether they reach out first. You start measuring your worth by how you treat yourself in moments of uncertainty. You ask yourself better questions. Not, why am I not enough? But why would I chase someone who isn't showing up for me? That shift in thinking changes everything. It moves you from needing validation to honoring your value. Growth also changes how you respond if the other person comes back. Instead of rushing to reconnect out of relief, you slow down. You listen more than you speak. You observe consistency instead of believing apologies alone. You don't ignore what the silence taught you. Desperation forgets the lessons because it just wants comfort. Growth remembers the lessons because it wants stability. If the other person doesn't come back, growth still wins. Because you don't collapse. You grieve, you process, and you move forward without losing yourself. You don't beg for closure from someone who chose distance. You create closure by accepting the truth of their absence. That acceptance isn't easy, but it's empowering. It keeps you from repeating the same patterns with the next person. Growth also teaches patience, not the kind that waits endlessly, but the kind that waits wisely. You're patient with your healing, patient with your emotions, and patient with the process of rebuilding trust in yourself. You understand that rushing to replace someone or rushing to numb the pain only delays growth. Silence becomes part of your healing, not something you're trying to escape. What happens next also depends on whether both people grow or only one does. If both reflect, take responsibility, and communicate with maturity, silence can become a turning point that strengthens the connection. But if only one grows while the other stays stuck in avoidance or ego, the silence becomes an ending. And that ending, though painful, is necessary. Growth requires alignment, not just effort. When you choose growth, you also become more selective about what you allow back into your life. You no longer accept confusion disguised as depth or inconsistency disguised as passion. You value peace over intensity. You value clarity over chaos. And that means not every reconnection deserves access to you. Growth gives you the courage to say no to what no longer aligns with who you're becoming. In the end, silence doesn't decide the outcome. Your mindset does. Desperation keeps you stuck in cycles of chasing and disappointment. Growth moves you forward, whether that means rebuilding something healthier or walking away with your self-respect intact. What happens next is not about who speaks first. It's about who grows.